The most powerful army in the world retreated, not because they lost, but because of what they saw. On a summer day in 1462, you are a soldier in the most powerful Ottoman army in the world. You have conquered Constantinople. You have brought down empires. Now you are marching toward a small principality called Wallachia to crush a rebellious prince. The march takes days, perhaps weeks. Then, as you move with the army, you catch a smell. Death, decay, and something else you cannot quite make sense of. Your army begins to slow down. The scouts stop, and as you round the hill near the capital, you see it. A forest, but the trees are not trees. They are thousands of human bodies impaled on stakes. Your brothers, your comrades, your kin, fixed onto wooden stakes in perfect geometric rows, stretching as far as the eye can see. Some have been dead for weeks, their bodies swollen and blackened. Others are still moving, still breathing, still screaming. The man who conquered the Byzantine Empire takes one look and orders his entire army to turn back at once. What kind of mind could create something like this? And here is the part that should truly frighten you. This was not madness. It was strategy. Something calculated and terrifyingly effective. The story you think you know about Vlad the Impaler is a lie, not because it never happened, but because the truth is far more disturbing. This is the full story of how one man turned human suffering into a weapon, and in doing so, changed the course of empires. And by the end, you will understand that the real horror was not what he did to bodies, but what he did to minds. Let's begin with a question no one asks. At the center of this story was not an ordinary ruler. There was a man who turned fear into a weapon, Vlad Tepes. What kind of fracture turns a person into something like that? His father, Vlad II, made a deal with Sultan Murad II. The agreement was simple. He would keep the throne of Wallachia. In return, he would hand over his two sons as hostages. Young Vlad and his brother Radu were delivered to the Ottoman court. Years later, historians would call it an education. Fine clothes, Turkish, Arabic, philosophy, military strategy. But for Vlad, it was not an education. It was observation. For 6 years, from the age of 11 to 17, he watched how one of the greatest empires in the world functioned. How did the Ottomans turn fear into an instrument of rule? How were mass executions staged? Why did some executions terrorize an entire city while others left almost no mark? Vlad was recording all of it in his mind. His brother Radu adapted. He became part of court life and even formed a deep friendship with the Sultan's son, Mehmed. Vlad did not bend, and he paid dearly for it. Ottoman records suggest that he was punished repeatedly. But every punishment became a lesson for him. A system was teaching him how power was used, and that system never imagined that one day its student would surpass the master. But Vlad was no longer the boy who had left the palace. In 1448, after 6 years of captivity, Vlad finally returned to Wallachia. He was 17 years old. 2 months later, his father was assassinated by rival boyars, who had played both sides between the Ottomans and the Hungarians. His older brother Mircea was buried alive. Vlad was utterly alone, surrounded by enemies, with no one left. And this is where the story becomes truly interesting. He did not want revenge alone. He wanted to reshape the world in the image of his own trauma. He would take everything the Ottomans had taught him and turn it into something even they had never seen. But first, he had to wait. For 6 more years, Vlad lived in exile, studying military tactics and political maneuvering, making his plans. In 1456, with Hungarian support, he finally seized the throne of Wallachia. The monster was about to be born. Vlad's coronation feast in 1456 should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the blueprint for everything that followed. He invited the boyars, who had organized his father's murder and his brother's burial, alive. Hundreds came, dressed in their finest clothes, believing they were there to swear loyalty to the new prince. The great hall was decorated and wine flowed constantly through the room. Then, in the middle of the feast, Vlad stood up and asked a simple question. "How many princes of Wallachia have you seen?" The older boyars proudly answered, 7, 8, 10. Some claimed to remember more than a dozen different rulers. They boasted of their political cunning, of their ability to outlive any prince. Vlad smiled and gave the order. Every boyar who answered was arrested on the spot. And this is where the methodical mind revealed itself. He did not execute them immediately. Instead, he divided them into two groups based on age and physical strength. The older men who had helped destroy his family were impaled at once in front of the palace walls, in a way designed not to cause instant death. Vital organs were avoided so that the dying would last for hours, sometimes days. Their screams became the soundtrack of what came next. The younger and stronger boyars, together with their families, were stripped of their noble clothing and forced on a death march to the ruined fortress of Poenari, 50 miles to the north. There they were given a choice that was not really a choice. Rebuild the castle with your bare hands or die. For months they carried stones up the mountainside. They labored until their hands bled, until their noble garments rotted away, until exhaustion drove them to the ground. Many died during the construction. Those who survived were never the same again. In this way, Vlad effectively erased the old noble class and replaced it with a new one that owed everything to him and feared his displeasure to the point of death. This was not simple revenge. It was the systematic destruction of the power structure that had weakened Wallachia. In 1459, Sultan Mehmed II, yes, the same Mehmed who had once been Vlad's childhood companion, sent envoys to Wallachia to collect the annual tribute that Vlad's father had agreed to pay. The demand came with an added insult. Vlad himself was expected to travel to Constantinople and renew his oath of loyalty. The envoys arrived expecting the usual political theater, perhaps some negotiation, perhaps a counteroffer. What they received instead was a glimpse of hell. When they entered Vlad's court, they refused to remove their turbans, following their religious customs, which were part of Ottoman protocol. Vlad asked them to explain the tradition. Relieved, perhaps believing that Vlad was seeking understanding rather than confrontation, the envoys explained. Vlad nodded thoughtfully. Then he said something that froze their blood. "I respect a man who honors his faith so completely. Allow me to help you honor it forever." He ordered his guards to nail their turbans directly to their skulls. Consider the precision of this cruelty. He did not kill them. Instead, he mutilated them in a way that carried powerful symbolism while still allowing them to survive the journey back to Constantinople. They became walking messages. As they fled the country, their screams echoed across the countryside. When Mehmed received these men, permanently disfigured and half-mad with pain, he immediately understood that this was no longer the boy he once knew. This was something new. Someone who had taken the Ottoman lessons of terror and turned them into something even the Ottomans had never imagined. War was now inevitable. Here is what most people fail to understand. Impalement was not simply execution, it was engineering. The common image is that a stake driven through the body causes instant death. but that would defeat the entire purpose. Vlad's method was far more sophisticated and infinitely more cruel. According to contemporary medical analysis and surviving Ottoman accounts, the process worked like this. The victim was first laid face down. A stake, carefully rounded at the tip and heavily oiled, was inserted at a precise angle designed to avoid major organs and blood vessels. Then the victim was slowly raised upright. Gravity did the rest. Over the course of hours, sometimes days, the victim's own body weight forced the stake upward through the torso. The path was calculated so that the heart, lungs, and major arteries would not be immediately destroyed. In some documented cases, the stake eventually emerged from the shoulder or chest, and the victim could remain alive for up to 3 days. Why such a method? Because Vlad understood something modern psychological warfare experts now confirm. Witnessing prolonged suffering is far more traumatic than witnessing quick death. A beheading on a battlefield is horrifying, but it ends quickly. Impalement was different. It was a spectacle that should last for days, with screams echoing through entire valleys. The physical act was only one part of it. The real genius was in the staging. Vlad placed his victims in public squares, along major roads, in front of city gates, anywhere that would maximize visibility. He understood that rumor alone would multiply the psychological effect far beyond the actual number of victims. One impalement witnessed by 100 people creates 100 storytellers, each of whom will describe the horror to hundreds more. The symbolism evolved as well. The height of the stakes reflected social rank. Peasants were placed on shorter stakes, nobles on higher ones, and the tallest stakes were reserved for enemy commanders. This created a grotesque visual hierarchy that reinforced Vlad's message. Everyone has a place in my world, and everyone will suffer according to their rank. Some accounts even suggest that the victims were arranged in geometric patterns, circles, stars, and concentric formations. This was not random cruelty. It was a demonstration of control. I am so powerful, the message said, that I can turn human suffering into art. By early 1462, Sultan Mehmed had had enough. Vlad had not only refused to pay tribute, he had also launched raids deep into Ottoman territory south of the Danube. In one particularly brutal campaign, according to a letter Vlad himself sent to the King of Hungary, more than 23,000 people were killed. He even kept records of the dead, categorizing them by age and gender. Mehmed, the man who had conquered Constantinople at the age of 21, crushed rebellion after rebellion and commanded the most powerful military machine in the world, decided to deal with the Wallachian problem personally. In the spring of 1462, he gathered an army estimated between 60,000 and 90,000 men. This was not an invasion, it was annihilation. Vlad had at best between 20,000 and 30,000 soldiers, most of them poorly trained peasant fighters. A conventional battle would have been a massacre. So Vlad did what he had been preparing for since childhood. He refused to fight a conventional war. When the Ottoman army entered Wallachia, they found nothing. Empty villages, poisoned wells, burned fields. Every possible source of food and water had been deliberately destroyed. Vlad had ordered his own people to abandon their homes, take their livestock, and retreat into the forests and mountains. The Ottoman supply lines stretched further and further. Then the night raids began. These were not typical battles. Vlad had trained units specialized in guerrilla warfare. Small groups of 50 or 100 men would slip into Ottoman camps at midnight, kill the sentries, set fires, and vanish back into the fog before a proper response could be organized. They targeted supply wagons, pack animals, and ammunition depots. The goal was not to defeat the army. The goal was to leave it exhausted, paranoid, and demoralized. Then came the masterpiece. June 17, 1462. Vlad learned from captured Ottoman soldiers that Sultan Mehmed himself was camped near Târgoviște with his personal guard and the elite janissaries. This was an opportunity that might never come again. Vlad personally led roughly 10,000 men in what would become known as the night attack with a single objective: kill the Sultan. Contemporary accounts describe absolute chaos. Wallachian soldiers wore captured Ottoman uniforms and spoke enough Turkish to cause confusion inside the camp. Tents were set on fire. Horses were released in panic. Entire sections of the camp were thrown into disorder. The attack focused directly on the section where the Sultan's tent was believed to be. They came within meters of Mehmed. Some historians believe Vlad and the Sultan may even have briefly seen each other across the burning camp, but the janissaries closed ranks around their ruler, forming a defensive circle. After hours of brutal close combat, Vlad realized he could not break through. He ordered a retreat, and just as suddenly as they had appeared, his soldiers disappeared into the darkness. The Ottoman losses were relatively light, perhaps 2,000 men. But the psychological damage was enormous. The Sultan of the Ottoman Empire had nearly been killed in the center of his own army by a force vastly smaller than his own. Then the army approached the capital, and they saw what Vlad had prepared for them. No written description can truly capture what Mehmed's army encountered when they reached Târgoviște in late June of 1462. But let us try. Imagine yourself as an Ottoman soldier. You have been marching through devastated lands for weeks. You are hungry, exhausted, and constantly on edge from night attacks. You have not seen the enemy in days. It should be a good sign, but it feels like a trap. As you approach the Wallachian capital, the smell hits you first. If you have ever smelled a dead animal rotting in the summer heat, multiply that by thousands. Then add the sickening sweetness of decaying human flesh. The smell is so thick you can almost taste it. Then you see the stakes. First one, then 10, then 100. And then you realize they stretch endlessly into the distance. Contemporary accounts describe an area nearly 2 miles long and half a mile wide, filled with impaled bodies. Modern historians debate the exact number. Ottoman sources, likely minimizing the scale, suggest around 10,000 victims. Wallachian and Hungarian sources claim as many as 20,000. The real number was probably somewhere between 15,000 and 20,000. But the most chilling part was this: it was not random. The stakes were arranged in perfect geometric patterns, concentric circles expanding outward from the capital. Some sections even formed star-like shapes visible from higher ground. Vlad had been preparing this for weeks, perhaps months. Some of the bodies had been dead for weeks, decomposing under the summer sun. Others had been impaled much more recently. And according to several sources, some were still alive. The Byzantine historian Leonikos Chalkokondyles wrote that the moans of the dying could be heard across the entire field. Some had been impaled for days, their bodies slowly collapsing under their own weight, too weak to scream but still conscious. Veteran Ottoman soldiers, men who had fought countless battles, reportedly vomited and refused to advance. At the center stood the tallest stake. Upon it was the body of Hamza Pasha, a high-ranking Ottoman commander captured in an earlier battle. His corpse was dressed in the remnants of his military uniform and positioned directly along the route by which the Sultan would approach. a personal message from Vlad to Mehmed. "This is what I did to your best men. Imagine what I will do to you." Sultan Mehmed II sat silently on his horse and stared at the scene for several minutes. Different sources record his reaction differently, but the most widely cited account from Chalco says this: "It is impossible to take the country from a man who has done such great things and knows how to use his power in this way." It was not praise. It was recognition. Within days, Mehmed ordered a general withdrawal. He left behind a force under Vlad's younger brother, Radu, to continue harassing him. But the Sultan himself withdrew with the main army. The most powerful army in the world had invaded a tiny principality with overwhelming numerical superiority, and had been forced back not by military defeat but by psychological warfare. Vlad the Impaler had won. You might expect that driving back the Ottoman Empire would have made Vlad a hero throughout Christian Europe. In some ways, it did. The King of Hungary and the Pope praised him as a defender of Christendom, but they failed to understand something important. Vlad could not stop. The methods that defeated the Ottomans did not end with the Ottomans. He began using them against everyone. By the end of 1462, he was impaling Wallachian merchants for raising prices. Boyars suspected of disloyalty were executed based on rumors alone. Entire villages were impaled for minor offenses. The weapon he had forged against a powerful enemy had become his only tool. His political position quickly collapsed. His brother Radu, supported by Ottoman gold and soldiers, presented himself as the reasonable alternative. Hungarian support disappeared. In November 1462, only months after his greatest victory, Vlad was forced to flee to Hungarian territory. And here comes the bitter irony. His supposed ally, King Matthias Corvinus of Hungary, imprisoned him on accusations that remain unclear even today. Vlad spent 12 years in Hungarian captivity, not in the brutal conditions of his Ottoman youth, but under relatively comfortable house arrest. He even married a Hungarian noblewoman and had children. In 1476, after Wallachia descended into chaos under a series of weak rulers, the opportunity returned. With Hungarian and Moldavian support, Vlad regained the throne in November of 1476. He ruled for perhaps 2 months. In December 1476 or January 1477, the exact date is uncertain, Vlad was killed in battle near Bucharest against an Ottoman force. The circumstances remain unclear. Some sources claim he was killed by his own men, either through betrayal or mistaken identity during the chaos of battle. Others say he was surrounded and killed by Ottoman soldiers. What is certain is what happened next. His head was cut off, preserved in honey, and sent to Sultan Mehmed in Constantinople as proof of his death. After everything, all the terror, the impalements, the psychological warfare, Vlad himself ended as a trophy displayed in the capital of the empire he had fought his entire life. His body is believed to have been buried at the Snagov Monastery on an island in Romania. Excavations in the 1930s uncovered a grave there, but it was empty. To this day, no one knows where Vlad's true remains lie. In Romania, Vlad is often remembered as a national hero. Harsh but effective, a leader who resisted overwhelming odds and preserved independence. Statues of him exist. His face appears on tourist souvenirs. In the rest of the world, however, things are different. After Bram Stoker borrowed his name and fragments of his history for the 1897 novel Dracula, Vlad became a symbol of vampirism and supernatural evil. In a strange way, that makes things easier for us, because it is far easier to imagine him as a monster, something inhuman. The real horror is something else. Everything Vlad did was human, painfully, disturbingly human. He was not born a monster. He was shaped by a system that taught him that terror creates power, that survival requires absolute ruthlessness, and that empathy is weakness. And he took those lessons to their logical extreme. The forest of the Impaled was not madness. It was applied psychology. The night attacks were not random violence. They were precise military strategy. And the most disturbing part? It worked. Against impossible odds, Vlad drove back an empire using calculated terror alone. He proved that fear, when used correctly, can achieve more than armies. So the real question is not whether Vlad was evil. That much is obvious. The real question is this: what does it say about human nature that such methods can be so effective? And in the shadows of history, how many other calculated horrors are waiting to teach us lessons we would rather not learn?